Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome to P7 Practice to Pass for June 2018 examination being organized by ACCA Pakistan. I would like to formally introduce myself first. I am Kashif Kamran, your tutor for this Practice to Pass session. I am a fellow Chartered Certified Accountant teaching this P7 paper since it was a 3.1 paper. It's almost over 11 years now being associated with P7. Currently, I am associated with Tabani School of Accountancy, which is a platinum approved learning provider of ACCA in Karachi, Pakistan. One of my unique characteristics of teaching P7 paper has been my exam-focused teaching style, which has earned me higher pass rates than the global averages. And in 3 instances, my students have secured Pakistan-wide positions. Now, let's formally start on with the P7 Practice to Pass session. And I would first like to clarify the objective of this Practice to Pass session. The objective of this Practice to Pass session is to demonstrate how to write an effective answer to boost your exam success. This is different from the previously organized webinars by ACCA Pakistan, which was primarily Prepare to Pass session. The current focus of Practice to Pass session is to assume that the attendees have knowledge on the given area and the presenter will guide you on how to write an effective answer. Now, this Practice to Pass session for P7 is spread over 5 days, which I will spell shortly. Now, when we are preparing ourselves for the Practice to Pass session for June 2018 examination, there are 3 very important questions which I will try to address over the next 5 days in each of the practice I'll be doing with you. The first question is how much to write. The second, what to write. And the third is how much time to write each question. These are 3 very important questions which I will be addressing in each and every topic I'll be doing in a question-based revision. Now, first of all, before I get to the attack of a question, let's first address these 3 questions quickly so you have a temperament of what exactly is likely to come over the next 5 days. First of all, when you're preparing yourself for P7 for June 2018 examination, the very first question is how much to write. I have seen students in P7 who write more when less is to be written, or write less when more is to be written. That means the students are unaware of the marking scheme. The marking scheme is published with each examiner answer and is easily accessible on ACCA website. But if a student is unaware of the marking scheme, the student can write more when less is to be written, means the student is wasting his or her time. Secondly, he's writing less when more is to be written, or more when less is to be written. Now, obviously, both equations can either bring you writing more, or the second equation can bring you writing less, which can be a big challenge in terms of crossing the 50 barrier. Okay, so we were discussing how much to write. The second is what to write and how much time to write each question. Now, obviously, what to write in P7 is very specific to the case study. If you tend to write generic in P7, you're far away from success. But if you write specific to the case, specific to the requirements, you have a better chance of success in P7. Remember, P7 is not a paper where a generic writing will help you pass the exam. It is not a paper where rote learning will help you a lot in passing the exam. And the last question is how much time to write each question. Now, once I start the question-based revision with you shortly, I'll be guiding you in each question how much time to write each question. Remember, you have 3 hours to attempt a 100 marks paper, and there are 4 questions you have in a 3-hour span. You cannot allocate overtime to one question, because if you're allocating overtime to one question, you're compromising your other question. I believe that your paper should be balanced and each question should be given the time each question has. You should not overspend time on one question and spoiling your second question. So each question contributes to your success in P7. So allocate proper time to each question. Now these 3 questions will be my critical success factor over the next 5 days. And I'll be guiding you on these 3 questions on a daily basis as we start to practice this for this session. Okay, now in terms of the 5-day plan, this webinar is starting today on the 16th of April and will be from Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time. On the first day, today, we'll be drafting business risk, audit risk, and risk of material misstatement. On the day 2 tomorrow, we'll be drafting ethical and professional issues. On day 3, we'll be drafting evidence. And on day 4, we'll be drafting reporting. I have carefully selected questions for each day, which are challenging questions, and the questions which will help you facilitate solving other questions. Each day, I'll be practicing like 2 questions with you. An equal amount of questions will be given to you as home assignments to apply the same concept you've learned in the practice to pass session. The day 5th is all about question and answer session. So day 5th, I'll be open to question and answer session, and I'll be responding to your chat. I'll be responding to your question and answers. So I think that is the day where you can ask me many questions, and I'll be there answering your questions. Each day is for 2 hours. Okay, so let's get to the agenda for the first day, which is drafting business risk, audit risk, and risk of material misstatement. Okay, I'm starting first with drafting a business risk because I consider business risk as a more high probable topic for June 2018 examination. Thereafter, I'll come down to audit risk. Now, in terms of the session question you have with you, we're looking at a December 14 question number 1. And in terms of December 14 question number 1, we are looking at the requirements. Right, so I hope all of you have this session questions with you and you can view them on the screen. I'm looking at the day 1 session question 2 first and the session question 1 after. Okay, now if you look at this question number 1, remember that the question number 1 technically have 35 marks. So that means you have 70 minutes to attempt this exam question. Now the first question which we are preparing ourselves for is basically a question where most of the marks are allocated on risk. If you look at this question first, this question has many requirements. So let's see how to carefully plan the requirements.
Once you start reading the email which has come from the partner to the manager, and I hope all of you are clear that the first question is in the format of an email, the email which comes from the partner to the audit manager. Now, in this email, the partner is saying, hello, I would like you to start the planning of the cannoli company. The company's finance director, Maggie, has sent to me this morning some key financial informations discussed at the latest board meeting. I have also provided you with minutes of a meeting I had with Maggie last week and some background information about the company. Using this information, I would like you to prepare a briefing note for my use. Now, this is another default of the first question, that when you look at the first question, you have to prepare a briefing note in the first question that will be given in the email from the partner. Now, we know there are 4 professional marks to put your answer in a format of a briefing note. And I'll be guiding you how can we get these 4 marks to present an answer in a format of a briefing note. But remember, that's the only format we have in P7. There is nothing like formats you see in P1 exams. It's only confined down to preparing a briefing note. Now, what we have to write in a briefing note as a manager, number 1. The number 1 requirement says, evaluate is a very important verb. Wherever the P7 examiner asks you to evaluate something, evaluate means you have to give a conclusion at the end of the answer. So it is recommended that when the P7 examiner is asking you to evaluate means to give an answer, give a conclusion at the end of the answer. There are 11 marks for business risk, right? We have to evaluate the business risk, and the marks given to us for business risk is 11. Now remember, each business risk is worth 2 marks. Now the marks are 11, that is an odd number, but still you would write 6 business risk to make it an even number. So evaluate the business risk faced by cannoli, the marks are 11, so technically that's 2 multiplied by 6, and we'll take in the marks to 12. So how many business risks to write? 6 business risks. The second requirement says identify and explain. So the examiner is coming to a very simplistic verb saying identify and explain 4 risk of material misstatement. 4 risk of material misstatement. So examiner is very specific. 4. He does not want from you 5. He does not want from you 6. He wants from you 4. So you will be writing 4 to get you marks. 8 marks. That's justifiable. Each risk in P7 is worth 2 marks. Whether you write a business risk, whether you write an audit risk, or you write a risk of material misstatement, each risk is worth 2 marks. The third requirement the examiner is putting to us in the email, that shows how diversified this email even is, because we should not have a mindset that the question 1 is just about risk. The major marks in the first question is about risk. You can see out of the 31 marks, excluding the briefing note marks, which are 4, 11 plus 8, 19 marks are allocated to risk. Then comes another requirement, part C, which says recommend. Recommend is to list something, right? So the examiner is asking us to recommend. What the examiner wants us to recommend? Recommend the principal audit procedures. Now we know recommend means to list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many marks we have? We just have 5 marks. So every procedure in P7, wherever it comes, in whichever question it comes, each procedure is worth 1 mark. Each procedure is worth 1 mark, right? And secondly, you have to remember one thing, that the procedures are written not in paragraph form. The procedures are written like sentences, as if you're recommending something. Bullets, right? In a format of a bullets. So 5 marks, 5 procedures. Procedures on the Cold Comfort brand. The last requirement says discuss ethical issues. Now we know in question 1, getting procedures and getting ethical issues has been very common requirements of P7 examiner, and most of the time the examiner do bring in the ethical issues and the procedures or one of them in the first question. Now we have to discuss the ethical issues, right? Discuss the ethical issues relevant to the audit firm and recommend appropriate actions. We need to recommend the appropriate actions. Now remember the marking scheme in the first question, or wherever ethics comes alone, when the examiner is just asking you to identify the ethical issues only, each ethical issue is worth 1 mark. Each ethical issue is worth 1 mark. And every action the examiner is asking you, every action is worth 1 mark, and every ethical issue is worth 1 mark. So 7 marks. So 7 marks are not much here, right? 7 marks are not much. So if I write like 4 ethical issues and 3 actions, I'll take my 7 marks. Or if I write 5 ethical issues and 2 actions, I'll take my 7 marks. I need to get to my target. My target is 7. Now I write more ethical issues and less actions. I write more actions and less ethical issues. I need to balance my marks to 7. So what we need to do in the first question, we need to prepare a briefing note, right? And that is a prerequisite of the first question in P7. Now, the briefing note can have ABC requirements. The briefing note can have ABCD requirements. That's the maximum, right? Now, in terms of the question we are solving, it has ABCD. First, we need to do the business risk, right? Second, we need to do for risk of material misstatement. Then we need to recommend procedures and then to discuss the ethical issues. Now, before I demonstrate how to write a good answer and how to utilize the case, I have those 3 questions: how much to write, what to write, and in how much time to write. Let's demonstrate that quickly in 5 minutes and then spend good enough time on drafting the answer. Now, if I take a guidance, right, we are attempting a question which is December 2014, question number 1. And we are doing it as a sample question to illustrate how to write a good answer, right? Now, first of all, be very realistic. We have to write a briefing note, and to write briefing note, we have 4 marks. How to split the 4 marks, I'll be guiding you. But you will learn this once and you will apply to all question number 1 in P7. Second, we need to evaluate business risk, right? And for that, we have 11 marks. Then third, we need to work on 4 ROMM, risk of material misstatement, and the examiner has given 8 marks to us. Then the examiner asked us to write procedures, and we had 5 marks to that. And then he asked us to write the ethical issues along with actions, and the examiner gave us 7 marks for that. Now, technically, I'm preparing myself for an answer: how much to write, what to write, and in how much time to write. First of all, evaluate the business risk. I know I need to write 6 business risk because each business risk is worth 2 marks, right? Now, how many marks I have? I have 11 marks. So I just have 22 minutes to write them down. In 22 minutes, wherever I am, I should technically stop and start the B part. In the B part, I have 8 marks. 8 marks means I have 16 minutes. In 16 minutes, wherever I am, whether I have completed or not, I'll switch to the C part. Procedures. 5 marks means 10 minutes. You simply multiply them by 2. Then ethical issues and actions have 7 marks, so I have 14 minutes. Now that is giving me a clear structure. I have 40, 50, 60. I have 62 minutes. Then I have 4 professional marks, which is from the briefing note. 4 professional marks. So 4 professional marks means I have another 8 minutes. So that is exactly the weightage of the first question. 35 marks multiplied by 2 is equal to 70 minutes. So in 70 minutes, I should write how much I can write. So technically, if I start to write in an exam hall, after 70 minutes, I should stop my question 1 and proceed to question 2. Remember, not one question will help you pass the P7. It's all your 4 questions. You cannot give over time. You cannot spend 70, no, I'll spend 100 minutes. That would be a big waste of time, right? So 70 minutes, right? And how many requirements we have? We have 4 requirements, A, B, C, D. So are you understanding how much to write? How much to write? The marking scheme. So I have given you the marking scheme for business risk. I've given you the marking scheme for ROMM. I've given you the marking scheme for procedure. Every ROMM is worth 2 marks. Every procedure is worth 1 mark. And every ethical issue is worth 1 mark for issue and 1 mark for action. Now, once you know the marking scheme, you know how much to write. You will not write more. You will not write less. In how much time to write? 70 minutes, right? And what to write is the case study. Now let's go down to the case and exactly see where in the case can I get my answers. Okay, if I go back to the case, my first requirement is to drill with you a business risk answer. So let's find 6 business risks from the case study. If I go back, and I have to find 6 business risks, I'll start reading the case from above the email. A lot of time I've seen students they start reading the case from below the email. The lines above the email can be very crucial and critical for information. Let's see what's so critical in the first one. Malik Awan, what should we do in the first 15 minutes of reading time? I'll be responding to that question on the Friday when we have a question and answer session. I'll be guiding you that how should we utilizing the first 15 minutes. Okay, I'm reading from the top right. You are an audit manager in Davies and Company, responsible for the audit of Cannoli Company, a listed company operating in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, when I'm reading a case and I come across that this company is listed, this company is a listed company. This is a listed company, right? Now, once I know this is a listed company and I know my question is on both the business risk and my question is both on ROMM, I have got my 2 points here. I've got 1 point for ROMM. I got 1 point for being a listed company. Now, we know that listed companies are highly regulated. It is a pharmaceutical industry even, so it's a highly regulated industry. One of the business risks could be non-compliance with laws, and one of the business risks could be that the company can face fines and penalties. If I look at it from the auditor perspective, being a listed company could be a risk of massaging the figures. Because when a company is listed, the company tries to window dress their financial statement to show a better performance. Now, if I pick this point, listed company, I'm in a psychological advantage that this listed company can give me 2 marks for business risk. The listed company can give me 2 marks for ROMM, provided I change my perspective. So the perspective of thinking the business risk is different, and the perspective of thinking an ROMM is different. So I'll just be telling you or writing an answer for you to inform you how you write in the listed company. But this listed company for me is very, very valuable information. Now I go down the answer and I start to read from the background information. Connolly Company is a pharmaceutical company developing drugs to be licensed for use around the world. Products include medicines such as tablets and medical gels and creams. Some drugs are sold over the counter at a pharmacy store, while other can only be prescribed for use by doctor. Products are heavily advertised to support the company's brand name. Products are heavily advertised. So one of the reason here is that the products are heavily advertised. Now we know if a business heavily advertised, that is good, but it should also bring return to business. It should also bring benefit to business. Otherwise, your shareholders will be very critical of that. Now, the products are being heavily advertised to support the company's brand name. Let's see, is it really supporting the brand name? If I go to the page 2 where I have some financial information, the financial information tells me that the company's revenue has increased. And the company revenue has increased by like $2 million from the last year. Okay, the products are heavily advertised as bringing inflow in terms of revenue. But if I'm a shareholder of a company where my company is heavily advertising, what am I getting? In terms of me being the shareholder, my operating profit has gone down. This is alarming. And my earning per share has gone down. And the products are heavily advertised, which is a lot of cost, which is a lot of expenditure. My cash flows have become negative. So if I am a shareholder of a business, I'll be very critical that even if my business is heavily advertising, am I getting the desired benefit against the advertisement? The benefit is on the top line. The revenue has increased, but my profitability has gone down. My earning per shares have gone down. So I have to see the cost benefit analysis. So advertisement is not bringing to me any cost benefit analysis currently. So products are heavily advertised. I'll be critical of that when writing the answer. Then secondly, in some countries, television advertisement is not allowed for prescription drugs. Now, in some countries, you cannot advertise, right? In some countries, television advertisement is not allowed for prescription drugs, the television advertisement. Now, we know the television advertisement plays such a crucial part to disseminate your product. Now, in the recent eras we are living in, the social marketing or the electronic marketing plays a crucial part to disseminate your products. The television advertisement is not allowed as something very significant. Reaching many will become very difficult. Had it been a newspaper advertisement, had been far better, but it says the television advertisement is not allowed. That will really affect the company's brand name in those countries. And the company cannot make a brand awareness of their medicines in those countries. So to me, products are heavily advertised is one point, and television advertisement is not allowed, is restricting the company from promoting their brand in those countries. Okay, there is a question from Termina. She's asking, sir, but the examiner answers really show a risk from the listed company point. Termina, yes, listed company points are considered as generic points, but when you need to guide students, you need to tell them that the list of risk can be from journal statements and from very specific statements. So when you're reading the question from top down, you will find very journal risk to very specific risk. Now you have to bargain which risk you will be writing. But if you write in a listed company risk, that's nothing wrong. The listed company risk is a very particular risk, right? And the examiner would reward you for that. In many questions, the examiner has written that, and in many questions, the examiner has not. So it's like both ways, right? So if I look at the last 10 attempts, I have seen so many times the examiner writing listed company as a risk, and many times has not been so. Okay. Now, currently, I'm standing at my third business risk, right? My first business risk was being a listed company. My second business risk was products are heavily advertised. Then the television advertisement is not allowed. Then I keep reading downwards. The market is very competitive, encouraging rapid product innovation itself is a business risk. If I'm a director of a company where the market is very competitive, I am very much concerned about my competitors. I'm very much concerned about what my competitors are doing. I am very much concerned about my company losing the competitive advantage. So the market is very competitive, encouraging rapid product innovation. They are doing rapid product innovations. New products are in development and improvements are made to existing formulas. So that means the directors are on the right track. 4 new drugs are in research and development phase. That is the risk of material misstatement. 4 new drugs are in research and development phase. I have to consider this as my ROMM. I need to apply the ICE 38. I need to be critical of how the company has treated the research cost and how the company has treated the development cost. If they have wrongly treated them, then there are risks associated with under and overstatement. Drugs have to meet very stringent regulatory requirements prior to being licensed for sale and production. Now, stringent regulatory requirements is another compliance risk. So for this company, there is another compliance problem. It is a listed company and they have to meet very stringent regulatory requirements prior to being licensed for production and sale. So another compliance risk. Research and development involves human clinical trials, the results of which are scrutinized by the licensing authorities. Now, what if you don't get a license? And I think this question, if you go downwards, has an issue, the human clinical trial. And there is already a case going on against the human clinical trial in this question. That means that if the company fails to get the license, the company can lose a competitive advantage. And even the treatment of research and development cost could be wrong. The last thing, Adam Nasir, yes, you have to refer IFRS and IAS when writing an answer only when you're very spontaneous on them and only when you know them properly. If you have forgotten the reference number, then only write the correct treatment rather than referring to a wrong reference. Once I come to the drafting, I'll be guiding more specifically to that. Okay, it is common in the industry for patents to be acquired. It is common in the industry for patents to be acquired. Now, patents is another risk of material misstatement because patent is another ICE 38. So has the company recorded the patents rightly as an intangible asset or not? Or is the company amortizing the patents or not? Do the patents have a finite life or an infinite life? Should they be reviewed for impairment or not? Resulting in legal actions. Now, legal action can be another business risk. So if there are legal actions, the company can lose its reputation. If there are legal actions, the company can even impair its reputation. So till that paragraph, there are many business risks. Until that paragraph, there are many risk of material misstatements. Let's show you the way of presenting the answer. If I take you to my answers, now these answers are the one which I've drafted myself. And I'll prefer that you read my answers carefully because this will exactly give you the way to write an answer within 70 minutes. Now, if I take you to the answer of December 14 exam paper and just want to show you how you write in an answer. When you're writing a briefing note, please ensure that you put a heading on top briefing note. You can see this heading here, briefing note. Let me do it bold. Okay, so briefing note has to come on top. Then you say to. Let's see who was to in the email. If I go to the email, if it's to the manager from Ali Stone, the audit partner, right? So I am writing it to Ali Stone, the audit partner. So in terms of the to is to the Ali Stone. So I'll particularly write the person name here, to Ali Stone, comma, the audit partner. And it's from the audit manager. So I'll write it from the audit manager. I didn't use the name of the audit manager because it was not given. A lot of time, student assume the name of the manager. Now, when we are writing the email back, we are writing the email back with RE. RE means regarding, RE means reply. Whenever we get an email from a person and we reply to the email, the subject line never changes. A lot of time, student tends to change the subject line. So the subject here is audit planning Canoli company. And I'll exactly write the subject here. Audit planning Canoli company. See, I didn't change the subject line. The reason for that was that the subject line never changed when you're writing the email back. And instead of the subject, I wrote RE. RE is reply or regarding. Yes, yes, you can use the title like audit manager because the name of the audit manager, Muhammad Abidi, has not been given, right? It was just the audit manager, so I'll write from the audit manager. If the name would have been given, I would have written the name, comma, the audit manager. Rafi bin Yahya, the business risk comes from both internal environment and external environment. There might be many problems within the business which might cause business risk. So business risk is not just the external environment. The business risk can even come from your operational weaknesses. If you remember the SWOT model, so business risk can relate not just with your threats, the business risk can also relate with your weaknesses. Okay, so how to write the briefing note? I put a heading briefing note to Ali Stone, the audit partner, from audit manager, RE audit planning Canoli company. Then you have to write the introduction of the briefing note. The introduction of the briefing note is to write the purpose. Write the purpose. The purpose of writing this briefing note. Now, how many purpose we had for writing this briefing note? We had 4 purpose of writing this briefing note, right? The first purpose was business risk. The second purpose was risk of material misstatement. The third purpose was to write in the procedures. And the fourth purpose was to write in the ethical issues. So your purpose has to be summed up in the introduction. See how I wrote this. The purpose of writing this briefing note is to identify the business risk and the risk of material misstatement facing the Canoli company. Further, this note also includes procedures on cold comfort brand as well as ethical issues in planning the audit of Canoli company. Right, so this is the introduction. So I have put a heading briefing note, then I have put a heading introduction. Then see, I am sticking to the order. My order first was business risk. So I put yet another heading business risk. And under the business risk, I start writing my risk. And I start writing the risk in the order in which I got them. Now try to learn something. When I'm writing the risk number 1, which is from a listed company, I put a heading, Canoli is a listed company, and see what I wrote under that. Generally, listed company needs to comply with greater sets of laws and regulation. Moreover, the company operates in a pharmaceutical industry, which itself is highly regulated. Thus, there is a high exposure of laws and regulation. Any non-compliance would affect Canoli's reputation, losing competitive advantage, facing penalties, or even in a worst case scenario, suspension of license. You have to understand one thing. Whenever you're writing a business risk and you have to score how many marks for each business risk? 2 marks. You have to explain the problem and you have to write its impact. You cannot end a risk without impact. Each business risk has an impact and the impact has to be given. Yes, exactly. Muhammad Abidi, introduction, purpose, and the requirement sequence. So Canoli is a listed company. So what should I be telling the examiner? First, I should explain the problem that being a listed company, we are subjected to greater number of laws and regulations. Then the impact. What's the impact? Any non-compliance would affect the company's reputation, losing competitive advantage, and even the suspension of license. See, in each of my paragraph, I will write the problem and I will write the impact. The second, heavily advertised. Heavy advertisement of brand name is a regular practice of the company which will keep pressure on the company's profit margin, because obviously the market is competitive. So in a competitive industry, advertisement has to be a regular feature. And see how I am linking. How am I linking? Yes, Farooq Qayyum, headings are preferable. Every risk will become a heading. So the headings have to be specific to the case, not journal headings. But headings is a best way to present your answer to question number 1. So see how I'm linking. I'm saying heavy advertisement of the brand name is a regular practice of the company which will keep pressure on the company's profit margin, which has already fallen. Giving numbers in your narrative wherever possible is such a high level skill. I've seen so many students that they don't link the numbers where they should be linked. So when I'm talking about heavy advertisement, I should be telling examiner that the heavy advertisement has already taken the profit margin down from 24% to 20%. You have to demonstrate the skill of bringing the numbers with narrative. The sales and relevance to this high advertisement has increased by 5%. So wherever I'm trying to put the analytical procedures results, I'm getting an impression. The company needs to ensure they're getting desired benefits of advertisement into sales realization. Otherwise, it's a waste of resource. See my impact? We were advertising a lot, right? But the advertisement is not bringing us good profits. So otherwise, it's a waste of resource and a pressure on the operating profit margin. Yes, you can do the working for appendix before starting the briefing note, because in exam you cannot show it after, because that would not be good for a student. So you can put the appendix first, or you can even put your appendix after the introduction, and you can then start writing the answer, because you will be needing the working of appendix later in your answer. Muhammad Abadi, headings is just like 2 words, 3 words. Just see my headings. Connolly is a listed company. I could have even said listed company, heavily advertised. So you cannot put headings in like sentences, right? Headings can be just like words, 2, 3, and very specific to the case. So see my point of view. My every paragraph, if you read it properly, every paragraph include the problem with the impact. And see the length of my paragraphs. I'm not just starting it and ending it. I am developing my point. It is a skill, right, which you have to learn, that you need to develop your point properly under every heading. You cannot give a vague point to examiner and expect the examiner will give you 2 out of 2 marks. No. If you are explaining the problem and then putting a proper impact of the business risk, then you're scoring in the 2 marks. See my third heading, advertisement is prohibited. There is a potential risk that if cannoli advertisement is run in countries where such advertisement is not allowed, would put the companies under a compliance risk, which would tarnish the company's reputation, See the impact. No risk can be without impact. I've seen so many students in P7 that they write the problem, but they don't write the impact. They write the problem, but they don't write the impact. So what's the critical success factor? Write the problem and also write the impact. Competitive market. You can continue reading my answers, but in my philosophy here is that I have to put 6 headings as like 6 business risk. And under every business risk, I need to ensure that I have a proper problem, and an impact. No, appendix is not necessary unless and until the examiner asks you to perform the analytical procedures. That's the only case when we put the analytical procedure. I'll demonstrate that appendix question shortly after this question, because the next question I'll do have that requirement where appendix has to come, right? Okay, so business risk, right? You will continue in that order. You can read my answers. See, after the 6th business risk, I have put a line for you and I've written a note for you that target marks end here, that is 11 marks. So the moment I write 6 business risk, that's the end of my answer for business risk. Now I have written number 7, I've written number 8, I've written number 9 just to guide you. So if you are reading it back at home, you should know that number 7, 8, 9, 10 is just for the sake of your guidance, that they are also the business risk from the case study. See how many extra I have written for the sake of your knowledge? But you have to stick to 6, right? Then comes the next heading, risk of material misstatement. The next heading, again I'm utilizing the same heading, listed company. Now please remember that when you are writing a risk of material misstatement answer, the risk is very different. When you are writing a business risk impact, let's do one quick exercise on this. When you are writing a business risk answer, the impact of the problem on the problem has to be linked to business. I'm just giving you example, right? But when you are writing a ROMM answer, or you're writing in an audit risk answer, the impact of the issue has to be linked to financial statements. Please try to understand this. It is very important because a lot of time students don't segregate them. When you're writing a business risk, first of all, you are a director of a company. You're thinking like a director. You're not thinking like an auditor, because the moment you think like an auditor, you will get distracted. And the moment you start thinking like an auditor, you will start applying IFRS. You will start applying IAS. Think like a director and try taking the impact on the business. But when you're writing an ROMM answer, or when you're writing an audit risk answer, then exactly you are an auditor. Think about accounting treatments, think about the IAS, think about the IFRS, but the impact has to come on the financial statement. So when you're writing the business impact, the impact of the business can be in many things, right? I generally tell my students that when you're writing the business risk answer, the impact of the problem has to be linked to business. Business what? Business reputation. For example, impact to business stakeholders, impact to business market perception, to market share, to the impact to your profitability, because that's one of the major business risks if your profitability is declining. That is your critical success factor. Every business have critical success factor, and anything which hits your critical success factor is a business risk. So the impact of a business risk can be many, right? The impact can be on reputation, stakeholders, market perceptions, market shares, profitability, liquidity. That is all your critical success factor being a director. Okay, and when you are writing the ROMM, or an audit risk answer, the impact of the issue is to be linked to financial statement. For example, how would I write an impact when I'm writing an impact for ROMM and audit risk? I will say understatement or overstatement of sales, understatement of overstatements of purchases, understatement or overstatements of receivable or inventory. See, account balances. I have to link it down to financial statement. If I think there is an audit risk or an ROMM, I should tell examiner what is being understated or what is being overstated, or else I'll write in the exam paper, or else the financial statements could be materially misstated. See the difference between a business risk and an audit risk or an ROMM? Being a director, I was concerned about my reputation, my stakeholder, my market perceptions, my market shares, my profitability. And being an auditor, I was more concerned about what is being understated, what is being overstated, because I was more concerned about the financial statement. And I was more concerned about the financial statements could be materially misstated. Right? Now let's demonstrate you something. If I go back to my answer plan, see, I want to show you that. When I'm writing a risk of material misstatement, see my tone. I wrote the listed company above in a business risk, and I'm writing the listed company in a risk of material misstatement. Being a listed company, there is an embedded risk within the financial statement of Canoli that the management can manipulate. The management can manipulate them to show better position. Thus, the financial statements could be materially misstated. See my answer? Now my answer is hitting the financial statement. If the company can manipulate the results, being a listed company, thus the financial statements could be materially misstated, particularly the income statement, which could show higher sales and profit than actual. See my research and development cost. I've given a reference under IS 38. There was one attendee who was asking, should I give reference or not? You should. You are encouraged to give reference only when you learn them and you are very spontaneous on them. Under the IS 38, the research cost is to be expensed out, whereas the development cost is to be capitalized, subject to a strict capitalization criteria. If the company fails to secure the loan, which is being negotiated for the court case against the company, there is a risk that the development cost should not be capitalized. Already, the intangible assets have increased from last year, justifying that the development cost was capitalized. See my answer, right? Thus, look at this last line. Thus, the intangible assets are overstated and expenses understated. See the difference between the business risk impact and the risk and the impact of the risk of material misstatement. The financial statements could be materially misstated. The intangibles are overstated. And I'm more prone to writing the treatments. See, the treatments been coming here under the IS 38. I am writing treatments. Patents under the IS 38. I'm again starting writing the answer under the IS 38. Patents is to be recognized as an intangible at cost. Once recognized, they should be amortized. And if the management is not amortizing, and non-amortization will overstate intangible assets, profits, understate operating expenses. See, how am I writing the answer for the ROMM? Remember one thing, that when you are writing an answer for risk of material misstatements, I normally emphasize this, which I would like to emphasize for you as well, that when writing an audit risk or ROMM answer, please ensure one thing, that there is a term known as materiality, there is a term known as treatment, there is a term known as risk. Now, when I am attempting a question where I think it is possible for me to determine the materiality, because audit risk and ROMM has to do with materiality. Now, if I go just back and show you one thing here, in my point number 4, extension of loan, see the last line. The examiner had given me the value. The examiner had given the value of the loan. So see, my last line says the loan extension is material to the financial statement. That is $10 million, which is 5% of the total assets. You should know the materiality scales. You should revise the materiality scales to judge whether something is material or not. So wherever possible, I'll try justifying whether it is material or not. So if I'm answering a question where there is a value, I'll try telling examiner, is this value material or not? Is this value material or not? Then secondly, the treatment. I should justify. I can only comment on the materiality, right? Where the values are given. So in the whole case, you will see some values and you will divide those values with the profit, with the total assets. I hope you know the scales of materiality to work on them. Treatments, you need to write the treatments, but you need to write treatments in concise form. You cannot elaborate the treatments. You cannot just spell out a treatment on half a page. A lot of students give too much emphasis to P2 and P7. Or a lot of student writes a lot of generic accounting standards. See my drafting. I have accounting treatments, but they're very concise accounting treatments. You just need to touch that area. You cannot just go on exaggerating the whole accounting standard. Right? I'll give you some examples of that once I come to the second question. Okay, how students exaggerate an accounting standard. And when you're writing the risk, be very specific that the risk is either in account balance. The risk is either in account balance, understatement, overstatement, or the risk is either in the financial statement. So either I'll say something is being understated or overstated, or else I'll say the financial statements could be materially misstated. Right? So this approach known as materiality, treatment, and risk is a very valuable approach, because when you're attempting an audit risk question or you're attempting a ROMM question, try to see, is there a value associated with the problem? So if the problem has a value, first comment on its materiality. Then the treatment. Write the treatment in a concise manner. If you think the treatment is wrong, then justify what will be understated and overstated with the wrong treatment. So please have a look at my answer to December 14 paper and carefully evaluate my answer, carefully read my answer to ensure how these points have been written down. Rather than just going over the answer, spend time on it. See why I have written something. Then I have written a note here that your risk answer ends here. Now, obviously, you're not doing ethics and procedures today. Ethics and procedures will come in the later day 2 and day 3. So I'm not spending time on ethics and procedures currently. But if I just take you down, I have written more than 4 ROMM just for the sake of knowledge, but I've stretched a line where 4 ROMM has ended. Number 5, 6, 7, 8 are all extra. See, then I'm writing the next heading, procedures. 5 procedures. Can you see the way I've written procedures, though procedure is not the agenda for the day today? Yes, I'll just be giving the namaz break in 5 minutes. But look at these procedures. Though we are not discussing procedures today, but just see the way of writing procedures. I've seen so many times student writing procedures like paragraphs. Procedures cannot be paragraph. See how I have written procedures. They're just like sentences, but when you read them, they're not vague. They're not vague. They're not ambiguous. They're very specific. When you read my procedure, you will not find anything missing in my procedure. And then after that, I'm writing my ethical issues. And when I complete my ethical issues are normally written in para forms, right? You can see the presentation of my ethical issues. My agenda for ethical issue is tomorrow, so I'll be discussing them properly tomorrow. But once I wrote the ethical issue, see, I'm giving a conclusion at the end of the briefing note. A lot of students ask me, is it mandatory to give a conclusion at the end of the briefing note? My answer is that in the 4 requirements we had, A, B, C, D, the requirement A had the word evaluate. The requirement A had the word evaluate. So you are only giving a conclusion, not of the whole briefing note. You are giving a conclusion of only the requirement. You're giving a conclusion of only the requirement, which has the requirement conclusion only of the requirement which needs to be evaluated. Now, what we need to evaluate in the 4 requirements, we need to evaluate the business risk, right? So only the requirement which needs to be evaluated. See, I've given the conclusion of only the business risk, but I have to give the conclusion. I have to give the conclusion, right? I have to give a conclusion at the end of the briefing note. I cannot give a conclusion in the middle of the briefing note, or I cannot give a conclusion at the end of the business risk. The conclusion relates with business risk because that was being evaluated. But see, I'm giving my conclusion at the end of the briefing note. Cannoli is facing numerous events and conditions that may have an adverse effect on the business performance in the short term. The research and development of the new products and getting licensed is essential critical factors for Cannoli, and both have associated risk with them, as highlighted above in evaluation of business risk. Yes, Sumaya, writing conclusion is part of the professional marks. I'll be illustrating that properly post namaz break. I'll be telling you the breakdown. I'll be telling you the breakdown of the 4 professional marks. 1 mark is for conclusion. 1 mark is for conclusion, but that is included in the 4 professional marks. I'll be emphasizing on the 4 marks very perfectly right after the break. But please remember the format of a briefing note. The briefing note starts with, if I just take you back quickly, the briefing note starts with the heading briefing note, then to from RE, then writing an introduction, then I stick to the order. Business risk came first, then ROMM came second, then procedure came third, ethical issue came fourth, and then I wrote a conclusion. See, I have gone in the order of the requirement. I didn't put B first and A after. So I did it in order, right? Because doing it in order has a professional mark. So I'm just taking a 10 minutes break for the namaz, the Maghrib prayers in Pakistan, and I'll be resuming in like 10 minutes, discussing a question on audit risk and telling you the breakdown of how to gain the 4 professional marks, right? We're just taking a 10 minutes namaz break. Okay, so I'll meet you after 10 minutes, right, with the start of the next question, which is June 2013, question number 1. If you want to start reading the session question 1, which you have, June 13, question number 1, start reading it, and I'll discuss that with you. Okay, welcome back after the namaz break. We are now starting on with the second exercise, which is the June 2013 question number 1, so that we have an illustration of something where you need to include an appendix, because there were a lot of attendees asking how to write in the appendix or how to show appendix in an answer. Now, if I just take you to the second question and then conclude that how you take the 4 professional marks at the end of this question. If I look at this second question, which has been planned for the day 1 of the question-based revision, this is from the June 13 exams, right? And this is the question 1 of the June 13 exams. Now, if I look at this question, again, this is an email question, but just having 2 requirements, A, B. So it's up to the examiner how the examiner utilize the requirements under the briefing note. So currently, there are just 2 requirements. Let's see what they are specifically. Now, if I look at these requirements, it says under the hello, it says, I understand you met with Ruth at the Parker company recently that you're planning for the forthcoming audit. To bring me up to date, I would like you to use this information obtained in your meeting to prepare a briefing note. Say again, it's asking prepare a briefing note. Prepare a briefing note. The first requirement is perform a preliminary analytical procedure. So examiner is asking us the first requirement, perform a preliminary analytical procedure. Then the examiner says, evaluate the audit risk. Evaluate the audit risk. Now this time the word evaluate is with audit risk. So I have to give a conclusion of the audit risk, right? So I hope you remember from the previous question, I only give conclusion of the requirement with which the examiner has attached the word evaluate. So this time I have to evaluate the audit risk, right? And then can you see the break and in the second line, identify and explain any additional information that would be relevant to your evaluation. Now that means in 24 marks, though there is not ABCD requirement here, but in the 24 marks, there are 3 requirements. First, I need to perform the analytical procedures. Then I have to evaluate the audit risk. And then I have to identify and explain any other additional information. I have 24 marks. Now in an exam pressure, how would you know how to break these 24 marks? A lot of students can break them equally, taking 8 marks for analytical procedures, 8 marks for audit risk, and another 8 marks for additional information. That would be wrong. I just giving you the breakdown of those 24 marks. The examiner is asking us to do 3 things. Then going down, the examiner says, discuss the ethical issues, just like the previous question, and recommend actions. 7 marks. So you know the marking scheme, right? 1 mark per ethical issue and 1 mark per action. 2 marks per audit risk. But let's see, what does perform analytical procedure means and what does additional information means for 24 marks? Okay, let's go back to the Word file. And this time we are drafting a question which relates with June 13 exams, right? So let's make a quick structure to June 2013 exams. You have my answer and you can say how I have written answer. I'll just take you to it. June 13 exams, the question number 1. Again, let's make a quick scan. We have to write a briefing note. So it's the default of the first question, right? And a briefing note, I have 4 marks. 4 mark means I have 8 minutes. To take these 4 marks, I have to present my answer. Then second, I have to perform analytical procedures. When the examiner says perform analytical procedures, the max marks you have, that is as per the examiner marking scheme from the past paper, the max marks you have is 6 marks for performing analytical procedure. What does it means exactly? I'll just illustrate that. Then the examiner was asking us to write additional information. The additional information the additional information is max 5 marks as per the marking schemes. So that means I had a 24 marks requirement, where 6 marks is for analytical procedures. I cannot get more than that. I have 5 marks for additional information. So technically I've left with 13 marks, which will now go on to the audit risk. For audit risk, I have 13 marks. See how I split my marks. As per the marking scheme, the examiner says, whenever I give you to write analytical procedures, I'll not give you more than 6 marks for analytical procedures. Then if you write additional information, you will not get more than 5 marks on that, so maximum 5 for that. And then the leftover is the 13 marks, which goes to the audit risk. Now, audit risk divided by 2, that means I have to write 7 audit risk, because I have to take the conversion to even number. So when I convert to the even number, it becomes 7 audit risk. So 7 audit risk will give me like that 14 marks. So I will be pretty safe in that context. Now, then I have to write on the ethical issues, right? Ethical issues and actions. And for ethical issues and actions, I have 7 marks. All right. Now, just want to show you one thing, because we bring a second question now. So how to take the 4 briefing note marks? A lot of student thinks that the 4 marks on the briefing note will only come for writing the format. That's not simple. When you're taking the 4 professional marks, how are you taking it? You have 1 mark for the format of the briefing note. For the format of the briefing note. So the format we just discussed prior to the break was, the format starts with the heading briefing note, to, from, RE. Then we wrote the introduction. After the introduction, we used the logical flow of the answer. And at the end of the briefing note, we wrote conclusion. Now 1 mark for the briefing note format, right? 1 mark for the logical flow. The logical flow is A, B, C, D. So whatever the examiner is asking in A, B, C, D, we have to maintain the logical flow A, B, C, D. I cannot change B, A, D, C. I have to go in the logical order. So that's very easy to maintain and get 1 mark. Then the 2 marks is for the persuasiveness of the answer. Persuasiveness of the answer. How persuasive your answer is. That means how impressive your answer is. Impressive. This is very subjective. Now, I believe no student gets full marks on persuasive answer, impressive answer. But out of those 2 marks, you can still take 1. You can still take 1 mark of the 2 if you write a conclusion at the end of briefing note for only the requirement which says evaluate. Now in this question, we have to evaluate the audit risk. So I'll only give conclusion of the audit risk. I'll not give conclusion of analytical procedures. I'll not give conclusion of additional information. I'll not even give conclusion of the ethical issues, right? I only give conclusion of the audit risk when at the end of the answer. Right? Is that clear to everyone? The 4 marks and how you spread these 4 marks towards the briefing note. So if you have any misunderstandings of these 4 marks, be very realistic to these 4 marks, right? Because I normally believe student thinks that I'll put the right format and I'll take the 4 marks. It's not that case, right? That you put the right format and you take the 4 marks, right? So the 4 marks is allocated in between the logical flow, the format of the briefing note, and the 2 marks are very subjective. Okay, let's get down and let's find in Yes, Muhammad Abidi, you should keep space then, because otherwise you lose the 1 mark. If you know B better than A, then at least try leaving some space for A and then start attempting B. because otherwise you will be losing that one simple mark for the logical flow, and could be a difference between 49 and 50. So please never lose professional marks. They're so very important in your success towards the 50 barrier. Okay, now what were we discussing? Perform preliminary analytical procedure. What exactly that means? Now, whenever the examiner asks you perform preliminary analytical procedures, when you have 6 marks for that, you need to show ratios, and each ratio with comparison. Ratio for the current year and ratio for the last year. Each ratio with comparison is worth 1 mark. Each ratio with comparison is worth 1 mark. So if I write 6 ratios with comparison, I'll be getting 6 marks. Now, a lot of time a student thinks that I have to show the commentary of the ratio. No, it's only the ratio. Examiner says for each ratio with comparative in the marking scheme, you will get 1 mark. It's not that each ratio with comparative and commentary is 1 mark. No, that's not the case. It's each ratio with comparative and 1 mark. So see how I have presented the answer. Let me take you back to my answer plan. If I go back to my answers, which have been shared with you as documents for this day 1, see this. I started the briefing note writing to Harry Shepard, the audit partner, from the audit manager, RE the Parker Company, just the way I wrote Connolly Company prior to break. Introduction. After the introduction, the very first thing I have to do was to perform the analytical procedure. See, so I put the first heading, results of analytical procedure, and see my table. In my table, just 1 minute. If you look at my table on the first page, see this. See, I just put the 6 ratios, and in front I put 2013 and 2012. You need to work out the answers and put the answers. And just by showing that table of 6 ratios with comparative, I'm taking 6 marks. But your formula cannot be wrong, will send a very bad impression. A lot of times examiner says these 6 are good marks in P7, but students at P7 level even write a wrong formula. So please ensure that your formula is valid, else these are 6 bonus marks. Shweb, if you work on comparisons, that is, you compare the current year with the last year, suppose you need to find out the growth in sales. Examiner says for every growth or for every decline you find out, you get half a mark. So if you're doing a comparison, right, comparison of the current year with the last year to find out how much things have grown or how much things have declined. So for every growth and decline you're finding, you will take half a mark, right? So half a mark per growth and decline, but 1 mark is for the ratio. So Maya, it's waste of time to show working. So I'll prefer don't show working, just directly show the answer, because obviously we have very limited time to do the 4 questions. Okay, so results of the analytical procedure. See how I presented that? So I think there were some attendees asking me at the beginning of the webinar that how should I put the appendix? So this is exactly the way of putting the appendix. That is right after the introduction, I put the appendix. Now, once I know the results, I'll go to my second heading, audit risk. What was the examiner saying? Perform the analytical procedures and evaluate the audit risk. How many audit risk? 7. See, my first audit risk, a new audit client. My second audit risk, my third audit risk, development cost. See the way of presenting them. See the way of presenting them. I'll just tell you one thing, right? But see, I put a line here. Can you see this line here? And I just justified here that my 13 marks have ended here. After that, whatever am I writing is extra. Then after that, I came down to additional information, which was my next heading. Additional information being my next heading, right? That was the order of the question because I cannot lose my 1 mark. And after the additional information, I went to the ethical issues, whatever the ethical issues are. And then see, I came down with a conclusion. The conclusion is only of audit risk. The conclusion is only of audit risk. Please become familiar with the format of the briefing note in the first question. That is not very difficult. I hope my answer to Cannoli, December 14, and my answer to June 13 will guide you on the steps to write the briefing note, and those 4 professional marks should become secured. Now, when the examiner asks you to perform analytical procedures to show ratios, each ratio with comparison is worth 1 mark without commentary, right? I'm writing it because a lot of students have a confusion with that, without commentary. They will ask me, examiner shows commentary in his answer. Yes, that's the sake of knowledge. The examiner says, I do many things in my answer, which is just for tutorial guidance. I do many things in my answer to guide students that this all could have been done, but you have to stick to what has been asked for in the marking scheme. So you will not show commentary, right? You will directly show ratios with comparison. Yes, a very important thing. If a ratio is converted into risk, suppose you found receivable days and you thought that the receivable days, for example, you're making receivable days for like 2013 and 2012, for example, right? And in the table you wrote that the receivable days in 2013 is 90 and the receivable days last year was 70. You've shown this and you get 2 marks. So ratio with a comparative. How many marks have you taken for receivable days? 2. Now, if I convert the receivable day into risk, I go down, I put the heading audit risk. And in the heading of the audit risk, I put a heading receivable days. And under the receivable days, I say the receivable days has increased by the receivable days has increased from 70 days to 90 days. That means the customers are struggling to pay on time. Thus, there could be a risk that adequate bad debts are not recorded, which could understate expenses and overstate profit and receivable. See, I converted the ratio to a risk. I told examiner the receivable days has increased. That means the customers are struggling to pay on time. Thus, there could be a risk that adequate bad debts are not recorded, which could understate expense, overstate profit and receivables. Now, this narrative is worth 2 marks because I just told you each risk is worth 2 marks. So I make my numbers. How much marks I got from this number? I just got 1 mark for each ratio. But for writing the risk associated with the receivable days, I'll get 2 marks. So interestingly, you should do ratios which can give you risk. In P7, there are risks associated with receivable days. In P7, there are risks associated with inventory days. You will see my answer for that. If inventory days are increasing, there is a risk of valuation, slow moving inventory. If receivable days are increasing, there is a risk of bad debts. Okay, so is that clear to everyone? Let me take you back to my answer. There is a question from Wakas Sir, you wrote only 5 audit risks for a 13 marks answer. Vakas, under my first heading, which is new audit client, I have written 2 risks. In the new audit client, there is a detection risk. And in the new audit client, there is a risk of material misstatement. So my heading of new audit client is worth 2 risk. So under the heading of new audit client, I have 2 risk, right? So my risk in total becomes 6. No, Vakas, we are not explaining analytical procedures. We are performing analytical procedures, right? The examiner is saying perform the analytical procedure, right? So we're just showing the results to examiner. We are not writing analytical procedure. That is a procedure, right? We're demonstrating analytical procedures. Right, so please do see these answers written on audit risk for a better guidance. I need to share something now with you, very important. If I just scan my answer, just to show you that how numbers can be utilized. If I just read my new audit client risk on this Word file, it says Parker is a new audit client for Hound Company. Therefore, the audit firm will have less knowledge of business, thereby increasing the detection risk. I was doing a question on audit risk. Audit risk includes the detection risk. So wherever I find the detection risk, I'll justify. See, so what I'm telling the examiner, Parker is a new client. That means being a firm, I have less knowledge. And if I have less knowledge, that means the detection risk has increased in the first year. Further, there could be a risk of material misstatement in the opening balances. See the 2 risks. One is the risk of detection, one is the risk in the opening balances, if such balances are wrongly brought forward by Parker management. Wakas, detection risk is to be specified because detection risk is unique. You never classify inherent risk and control risk because those are known as risk of material misstatement. Because detection risk in an audit risk answer is so unique because it will be just once in the whole answer. So you specify that because of this, the detection risk increases. So for detection risk, you do specify, right? And I've been very clear on that even within my last webinar, that detection risk is to be specified because that's exclusive. But inherent risk and control risk, no, they're the risk of material misstatement basically. So you cannot classify this as inherent risk or this is control risk. You have to just say the risk of material misstatement. I hope, Vakas, you're clear with the answer. Okay, so if you look at my note 1, the note 1 is the cost of sales, right? The cost of sales, the provision is wrongly classified in cost of sales, whereas it should have been classified under operating expense. Thus, this must have distorted the company's gross profit margin. The provision is under-recorded. See, where I can bring values, I bring values. And see what I'm telling the examiner. I'm telling the examiner the provision is 30% of the profit, whereas it is 0.7% of the total assets. Thus, the provision is material to profit only. I need to calculate the materiality. I need to calculate materiality where the values are given. And I hope all of you know the materiality thresholds. It's 1 to 2% of the total assets. It's half to 1% of revenue. And it's 5 to 10% of the profit. So the provision is 30% of the profit being material, whereas it's just 0.7% of the total asset, thus being immaterial. So it's profit which is making provision material. So please go scanning down my answers. See how I have written the development cost. Again, in the very first line of the development cost, I have written the materiality. What is the materiality of the development cost? And then see my last line. The last line says what is being understated and what is being overstated. If there is a value, associated with an accounting treatment, right? If there is a value associated with an accounting treatment, you can make a flow of the answer. You can start first with the value. Is it material? Is it not? Then you can speak of the treatment, and then you can speak of the risk, right? So you can make a flow. If you think there is an accounting issue and the accounting issue has a value, so you will first tell examiner, is this value material or not? One. Second, you will tell examiner, is the accounting treatment right or wrong? Third, you will tell examiner, what's the risk? So let's make that a rule of thumb very clearly. Let's do one quick scan of this. If an accounting issue has a value given, in a question on ROMM / the audit risk, then this could be a better approach to write an answer. This could be a better approach, right? You can make your own approach provided you're taking things effectively, but this could be a better approach to write an answer. Suppose I am doing an answer where I think there is an accounting issue and the accounting issue has a value. For example, there is an accounting issue which relates with research cost, and the examiner has given me a value of research cost. What will I do? I will first write in my answer whether the amount or value is material or not. That can become my first sentence. Then I will tell in my answer whether the accounting treatment is wrong and why. Lastly, I will tell what is being understated or overstated in the financial statement. See the flow? It's easy to remember for exam paper. If an accounting issue has a value, Farooq, is it necessary to mention its ROMM or just explaining the risk would be fine? Yes, if the risk is basically the under and overstatement, right? So if you can tell examiner what is being understated and overstated, that is very fine. Or if it's difficult to identify what is being under and overstated, then you will tell the financial statements could be materially misstated. Is that clear, Farooq? Yes, Farooq Maksud, the purpose of this webinar is practice to pass, right? It's not prepare to pass. The last webinar was where I first taught you and then delivered an answer. But in this question, I am assuming the audience in front of me knows the subject matter, and on that basis, I'm just attempting an answer. This is a practice to pass session, not prepare to pass session. It is a question-based revision. Okay, is everyone picking my point? So if an accounting issue has a value, then if the value is given, you will first determine the materiality, then you will think about its accounting treatment, and lastly, what is being under and overstated. For example, if I go back to my answer plan, see my note number 3. The note number 3 says the revaluation reserve for $2.5 million is fill in the blank percentage of the total assets. So you have to fill in the blank. So see, I'm starting first with the value and the importance of the value. The revaluation reserve of $2.5 million is fill in the blank percentage of the total assets. There are several risks associated with revaluation of property. The depreciation could be understated and the tangible assets overstated if excess depreciation has not been charged on the revalued amount. Moreover, there could be a risk of inappropriate disclosures or no disclosures relating to revaluation, which could materially misstate the financial statement. See, can you feel the difference? When I was talking about the depreciation relating to the revalued amount, because depreciation was an account balance, so I was very clear depreciation could be understated. But when I talked about the disclosures have nothing to do with under and overstatement. So see what I wrote for disclosure. For disclosures which could materially misstate the financial statement. If something hits the account balance, I'll say under and overstate. But if something is like a disclosure, I cannot say because disclosure is not given, it will understate the financial statement. No, I'll say if the disclosures are not given, the financial statements could be materially misstated. Right? So you should be very specific. You should be very specific, right, in terms of writing the risk. So the risk can be of two types, right? The risk can be in an account balance, or the risk can be in the whole financial statement. And again, more time you spend on reading my answer, you will pick these points and a common sense of writing an answer on audit risk. So first of all, be assured of the marking scheme, right? Each audit risk, each business risk, each ROMM, you should know how much marks to allocate to them. Then you should have a common sense that how many audit risks should I be writing, how many business risks should I be writing, and how much time I have. Because I've seen a lot of times students have 12 marks, they should write 6, but they're writing 12. And you ask them, why are you writing 12 risks for 12 marks? And they'll say, what if my one risk gets wrong and my another risk would be rewarded? No. When the examiner is giving you 12 marks, the examiner is asking you to write 6 business risks because each risk is worth 2 marks. You cannot say 12 marks, 12 risk. Why you wrote more? Because you had an optimism. You had an optimism that even if one gets wrong, the other gets right. No, that's not the case. Right, so please ensure one thing, that when you are reading the question requirement, first try to understand from the question what exactly is the examiner asking for, make a mind map, how many marks to allocate, and then attack the question. And when you attack the question, the better approach is go top down. And top down, make up your marks. Wherever you find a point, stop and think, okay, I got my 2 marks. Then go down, stop, think, I got my other 2 marks. Right? There are session assignments which has been uploaded as documents to this webinar. Please do the same practice back at home. Read the question, underline the requirements, see where to write a conclusion, where not to write a conclusion. Try spending time with marks allocation and try to see whether the marks allocation brings your answer within time. Because a lot of time we just write too much. We write too much. And that is a big issue for failing P7. We try to exaggerate things, unnecessarily getting nothing out of it. You have to be specific and you have to be concise. You cannot be generic and you cannot exaggerate. Okay, Abdullah, when we are required to write 6 points for audit risk, can we write 7 as a safe side in case one is wrong? Again, Abdullah, I was just discussing the same point. That is just an optimism, right? That is just an optimism. The examiner would check the first 6. Sir, could you please explain how to write an additional information? Yes, I'll be addressing how to write an additional information on day 3 when I do evidence. Joe Kong, 6 marks of analytical procedure, that is as per the examiner marking scheme. If you look at the examiner marking scheme, every time examiner give you analytical procedure, he will write in the marking scheme 6 marks, maximum 6 marks. So where I got to know 6 marks, that is the track or trend of the examiner. Yes, Wakas, I'll be discussing additional information on day 3 when I start evidence, and I'll justify what is the difference between evidence, procedure, and additional information. Okay, let's do a final recap. Now, the first day of this question-based revision was to be very much focused on writing a business risk, audit risk, and ROMM answer. At least I have given you one answer as a sample answer for business risk, one sample answer for audit risk, and one sample answer for ROMM, which you can spend time on and see how to write in an effective answer. I have given you session questions so that you can practice them and try to apply the techniques you've learned through the webinar. Obviously, tomorrow, day 2, we'll be working on ethical and professional issues. So you can come prepared with ethical and professional issues for the class, for the webinar tomorrow. But let me do the recap of the key learnings we got from the day 1. Now, in terms of the day 1 learnings, which was focused on business risk and audit risk and ROMM, let's see what were the key learnings. 1. Each risk is worth 2 marks. I hope you will remember that. So whenever you see your marks, divide them by 2 and you will know how much to write. How much to write. 2. No risk can be without impact. Whether you're writing a business risk or you're writing an audit risk or you're writing an ROMM. No risk can be without impact. And I have just justified in my webinar today that what is an impact of a business risk and what is an impact of an audit risk. Third, audit risk, ROMM, the impact is within the financial statement or an account balance. I did justify that as well, right? So when you're writing an impact of an audit risk or you're writing an impact of risk of material misstatement, the impact is within the financial statement or within an account balance. I just justified that, right, through the example of a disclosure. So if disclosure is not given, then the impact is in the financial statement. Or if the depreciation is not charged, then I'll say operating expense could be understated or operating expense could be overstated. Fourth, business risk impact is on the business critical success factor. So you need to think about what a business CSF. I just given you some examples of business CSF in the lecture, in the webinar today. So business risk impact is on the business risk critical success factor. So you need to think about what are critical success factors of the business. I've given you examples, right? Like reputation, like stakeholders. So anything which affects your business reputation, anything which affects your relationship with stakeholders, etc. And the audit risk impact is in the financial statements or in the account balance. And the last one, writing an effective briefing note, not losing the 4 professional marks. I did justify the breakdown of the 4 marks. So please emphasize on these key learnings that you got from the exercise today. Spend time on a business risk answer, spend time on an audit risk answer, spend time on a risk of material misstatement answer, and please ensure you bring in an excellent answer. Okay, just one last thing, ending things down for today. The agenda for tomorrow, because there are many attendees asking for that, tomorrow would be ethical and professional issues. So please ensure you come prepared with that and you have a knowledge on ethical and professional issues, because I'll be starting questions directly on ethical and professional issues tomorrow. Okay, just for 1 minute, if I go back to my Word file, I want to draft one thing for you. Okay, one last thing, right? When you are writing an audit risk answer, you can score your marks well if you comment on the materiality where possible. Remember, each time you comment on the materiality, you will take 0.5 marks off the 2 marks. So don't lose those 0.5 marks. You think I can comment on the materiality, there is a value given, I can comment on it, because commenting will give you 0.5 marks. Moreover, write the accounting treatment concisely, not exaggerate, not elaborate. Suppose if I give you one example, the question says research cost is the question is saying the research cost, right? and the student starts to write research cost should be expensed out, whereas the development cost should be capitalized subject to a criteria given in IAS 38. The following is the criteria of IAS 38 colon, and he says XYZ1, he says 2, he says 3, 4, 5, and then he realized that the question was only talking about research costs. The question was not talking about the development cost. So I wasted my time. I should have only written that the research cost should be expensed out. And then I would have thought, is the examiner giving me the value of the research cost? Then I would have commented on the materiality of the research cost. And then I would have thought, what if the research cost is capitalized? If the research cost is capitalized, that's a wrong accounting treatment. It could overstate the intangible assets. It could understate the expense. But when the question is asking you just the research cost, it's just an example. A lot of times student tends to write the whole accounting standard, even though the examiner is asking just one parameter of it. I'll be illustrating more of such examples on day 3 when we're writing evidence, because evidence is very much closer to writing the accounting treatments. Yes, Mars, you can write it is immaterial, but normally in a question number 1, nothing will be immaterial. All things will be material. But if you find a percentage where you think the percentage is immaterial, then you have to comment that this is immaterial, because examiner will give you half mark for commenting on whether it is material or whether it is immaterial. Is that clear, Mars? Okay, anyone, right? Because there are many queries. There are many queries asking for the prior session slides, prior session recordings, asking for my past paper answers. Again, I think the link of the WhatsApp group has been shared with you. And if you become part of the WhatsApp group, so any resources which I have used in my prior webinar for March 18, I'll be sharing with you in the WhatsApp group. Right, so please join into the WhatsApp group. Okay, and more importantly, the Word file I used in the webinar today, I typed something on the Word file today. I'll save this Word file on a daily basis, and on a daily basis, I'll put this Word file onto the WhatsApp group. So on a daily basis, if I'm using a Word file, don't be worried about it, because anything on the Word file, I'll just save it and put it on the WhatsApp group. I think that's a concern of many students, right? They want this Word file, or they want me to scroll up and scroll down. Okay, so I hope you had an effective day 1 today. Question-based revision for P7, June 2018 examination. Spend your time on the topics we did today. Tomorrow we are meeting back 6 to 8 Pakistan Standard Time for the day 2, which is on ethical and professional issue. I hope you had a good session today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.